Okay, are you all ready to do some mountain climbing? I have to confess, I'm going to talk about mountain climbing, but I've been on the top of many, many mountains, but I usually took a ski lift to get there. But nevertheless, when I was a kid, my Boy Scout troop climbed a hill outside of Boston called Great Blue Hill, which is all of 635 feet high. And by the way, if you're a follower of public broadcasting and you occasionally see a presentation by WGBH, the GBH is Great Blue Hill, where their first transmitter was located in the early 50s when they set up. I did later on go to summer camp and participate in a trip with about 15 other young boys and a couple of adult advisors on a hike through the presidential range in northern New Hampshire. And we started by climbing Mount Washington, which was 6,288 feet, so it was a much different climb. And also Mount Washington has a reputation for bad weather, difficulties and things like that, so it was far more of a challenge. Fortunately for us, it was a beautiful day. We didn't have to put up with the wind or anything like that, but I've talked to other people that have climbed Mount Washington, and they've talked about, rain and wind and all sorts of other things, so God was really kind to us. In fact, our whole trip was beautiful. But I learned a number of things in this mountain climb. Clearly, you have to prepare for it. It's not something you just wake up some Saturday morning and say, I think I'll climb Mount Washington today. You have to, work yourself up to it. And so the leaders had us out. They gave us backpacks with rocks and stuff in them, and we hiked around the campsite where we were staying for about 3 or 4 weeks walking around. And I think we were pretty ready to climb up Mount Washington. And then climbing, and clearly you climb as a group. Don't climb by yourself. It's probably one of the greatest sins is to climb by yourself, because you're going to run into problems and you always need help. Fortunately, there's usually a trail that you can follow, and you do have to overcome obstacles, even though there's a trail. Weather can knock trees down or rocks down. And don't be fooled by false peaks. One of the things they warned us about is you're going up and you see, there's the peak. And you get there and you go, it's not the peak. And then you see another one, and you get there and you say, we're here. Oh, no, there's another one. And I think that's our spiritual lives is quite often we think we're there, and then we realize, no, I'm just beginning. And then you get to a certain point and say, I think I'm there. And then you go, no, there's more to do it. And so you have to keep climbing until you get there. And I think in our spiritual lives, we'll probably keep climbing until we die, but it's a good climb. It's an excellent climb. And as I said, the weather is always bad, and I had a friend that had climbed Mount Washington. He did it in bad weather, but he was wearing cotton, and he got wet, and apparently they say cotton kills, because apparently cotton doesn't wick away the water, whereas woolen clothes will wick away the water. And of course, the modern fabrics now do a great job of that, so you have to be really careful. But when you get to the top, you see things very, very differently. I remember at the top of Mount Washington, looking across the valley at a ski area, I think it was Wildcat Mountain. I've skied that mountain. It's very different when you look down at it, and you see the trails and everything, as opposed to being on it and seeing Mount Washington over there. And so it changes your perspective. And but it is an exhilarating feeling. I mean, you've worked and you've worked and you've worked, and this has been hard, and you've finally made it to the top. And the view is just beautiful, and you really do feel closer to God by being on it. And later in that evening, we had to climb down to a hut where we stayed overnight. The Appalachian Mountain Club operates a number of huts in the presidential range, and they actually literally carry the food and things up to those huts to feed the people. We were there, and we were sitting outside, and there's a thing that's called Tuckerman's Ravine, and the clouds came in and they were spilling over the top of it. What a beautiful sight. I mean, it was just gorgeous. You really feel the God of creation present when you see this stuff. Now, when we look at in 2019, Patty, my wife, and I made another trip up to Mount Washington, but this time we went up in a van and were driven up to the top. And it was really beautiful. And again, it was beautiful. But while we were there, a dark cloud moved in, and pretty soon you couldn't see very far. I did not hear a voice in that cloud, though. And so what did I learn? I learned first off, you need to know your objective. What is it you're looking for? What is it you're trying to get? Why are you climbing the mountain? I mean, isn't that a phrase a lot of people say was, why do you climb that mountain? Why do we go to church? Why do we go to Lent? That's one of the questions we have to look at. And then you have to, once you make that decision, you have to plan how you're going to get there. Like I said, climbing Mount Washington, or even in our lives, it's not something you just wake up in the morning and say, all right, I think I'm going to do this, and try and go off and do it. You have to prepare yourself for it. And then it's always good to take time to reflect on your success and what you've done. So looking at the gospel, and what was the objective of the disciples? Probably to a certain extent to do whatever Jesus told them to do. And I'm sure as they're going up, because remember, these are fishermen. And by the way, Mount Tabor, which is the mountain we think they were climbing, is 1,900 feet, so it's not really, too tall, but it's clearly bigger than Great Blue Hill. But these are fishermen. They don't climb mountains. They probably don't do a whole lot of running or anything like that. So this was probably a heck of a trek for them getting up there, which is why I think they fell asleep at the top. Don't you love our leaders of the church? They always fall asleep at good moments. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is praying for his life, and they're sound asleep outside. Here Jesus is, talking with Moses and Elijah, and they're sound asleep there. Sometimes in our lives, we sleep through the most important things in our lives, and as they did. But they were going up to pray, and I'm sure when they got up to the top of it, they looked out. Mount Tabor, from what little I know of it, is just like this big hump on the plain. And a friend of mine who's traveled to Israel said, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It almost looks like something the glaciers left behind, way back when. But it's not too far from the Sea of Galilee. And so I'm sure these fishermen who had been fishing on the Sea of Galilee most of their lives are looking out, and they see the sea in a completely different way. Now they see the whole sea, not just that little part that they're fishing in today, but the whole sea. And it's kind of like me looking across the valley at Wildcat Mountain. All of a sudden I see the whole thing, and they see it. And I'm sure they're wondering about it. And then, of course, they could look around at the plain, the fields that were being sown and things like that. And so I'm sure they were impressed with that. And then they had to, they're reflecting on their success. But then, when they wake up, they see Jesus talking with Elijah and Moses, and Jesus has changed into completely white, and then he's talking to him. And how would you feel if you woke up one day and saw Jesus talking to somebody in your bedroom? And so I'm sure they're, wow, what's going on? But the transfiguration for them was that they now saw Jesus in a new light. Jesus was no longer just a prophet, a wise man saying good things. Jesus was the Son of God, and these are the great leaders of the faith, Elijah and Moses talking to him. Obviously that had to have an impression on them. And I love it when, it says, and Peter said, should we build 3 tents, because he didn't know what to say. I wouldn't know what to say if I saw that. And so I had to feel with him. But in our lives, we all have mountains to climb. They may be financial, relational, spiritual. There are so many mountains in our lives that we have to climb. And we have to prepare ourselves. And Lent is a wonderful time to start preparing for them. We see in the first reading, Abram, and there's another one of those great things. God comes down and says, you're going to be the father of a great nation. And he's going, I'm an old man. Sarah's an old man. We have no children. How am I going to be a father of a great nation? And he had faith. He had faith in what God was telling him. And even Paul was struggling with the Philippians. They were having difficulty. When you really read the Bible closely, you realize that even Paul and even Jesus had some of the same problems we have in our faith today. And the Philippians were arguing about, well, what is this? What is that? And Jesus is just telling them, love one another. Be kind to one another. Listen to one another. Really great things. And we have these, I would call those Paul and Abram's mountains to climb. And so we need to do that. And Lent is a wonderful time to do that. And when we start Lent, we sort of have to wonder, what is our objective? Well, clearly the objective is Easter Sunday. And for some people, it's so they can eat my chocolate again. But really, it's a time to reflect. Lent is a time to reflect on Jesus Christ, Son of God. And we do that on Easter Sunday when he rises from the dead, when he is risen from the dead, and we see, just as Peter, James, and John saw on that mountain talking to Elijah and Moses, we see Jesus risen from the dead, alive again after his crucifixion. And so this, to a certain extent, our Lenten experience is that mountain to climb as well. And, what is it? We sort of clean ourselves of the things that are between us and God, the things that keep us away from being true followers of God. First we have to reflect on them. What is it that keeps me from God? And what do I do to get closer to God in this process? So we have to plan how we're going to get there. And some of this is, take time to learn a little bit more about your faith. Take time to practice a new prayer form. If you say a prayer in the morning, can you add something to it? If you don't say a prayer in the morning, start saying a prayer in the morning. And occasionally come and see the Stations of the Cross and reflect on those final hours of Jesus' life. And reading the Bible or on a daily basis. Grow closer to God, but also reflect on your life. And again, what is it? Why am I not reading the Bible regularly? Why am I not praying regularly? And how can I change that? And we always tell you is when you set up all these things during Lent, you don't have to stop on Easter Sunday. You can keep doing it all year long. And then reflect on its success. The things that we are doing will bring us closer to God. And that's the beauty of Easter Sunday, is realizing that we do have the Son of God. We do worship the Son of God. He is risen. He is with us today. And like the disciples, we will see him in a new light. And it's kind of like how we refresh and reframe our faith. We hope what we learned during our Lenten journey will help us with these mountains that we are called to climb.